date when they came into effect. So we're going to look at some of the main issues. We're going to provide you an overview of recent ministry information that was shared with some stakeholders and go through the questions that were answered at that presentation. Review questions submitted in advance either through email to myself or to Michael, and take your questions today too. So we'll be using the chat box for you to ask your questions. So you can just type them in, and you can type them in at any time as we're going through the presentation. Sometimes it's challenging to moderate that kind of a discussion, so we'll do our best. And if there are unanswered questions at the end, don't worry. You'll have our email. You'll be able to reach out to us directly to get more information. So here's just a few of the issues that have come forward recently through our own anecdotal evidence and from people contacting us: testing frequency of water, the admission standards, certifications, variants of application of the new regulation across the province. Certainly this is not a new issue, but one that has become even more apparent as we transition to these new regulations. Fine levels for infractions, and we'll spend a bit of time on that, and the changing of Class A and Class B pools. So you can have a Class B pool now that becomes a Class A pool, and so we want to review some of the messaging that we feel is important around those. So first off, a couple of weeks ago, there was a Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care webinar where they, again, reviewed the changes. But the interesting thing is they collected some questions prior to the webinar. They also had 3 health inspectors, 2 or 3, I think, health inspectors on the call. And those people gave their opinion about, to answer some of these questions. There was discussion. So it really highlighted the conflicting views in the different regions, where one health unit would say, yep, we think that's good, or no, we're not on board with that, or we have a different procedure. So it really just highlighted the importance of really open communication with local health inspectors, and again, some of the advocacy that Pro, Life Saving, and Red Cross are going to be doing over the next little while to ensure that there is more common understanding of the regulations and their application across the province. So here I'm just going to dive into the questions that they had provided for us, and so these were given to the Ministry of Health, and then the answers given here are directly from the Ministry of Health webinar presentation. So if a wave action pool does not have the ability to conduct a swim competency test, can they treat all swimmers under 10 as non-swimmers and require that they wear life jackets? So for site-specific processes, it encouraged that the operator speak to industry experts such as Life Saving and Canadian Red Cross to determine a site plan that is appropriate for the facility. I don't think there's anything new there. All of us would be working with our the experts in the field. In cases where a traditional swim test is not possible due to a lack of an appropriate pool for testing, an operator should discuss with their local public health unit as well. And this is where we found there was a difference in approach across the province. And the ministry also wanted people to note that this did not remove the requirement for guardian supervision. So, Michael, did you have anything to add to that?
Diane, I think the only comment I might have is that we recognize this as an issue because we received several questions from operators. And so we struck a group of operators who operate these wave pools to discuss this and try to come up with some strategies that might help them. I think given the release of the regulation so quickly and deadline of July the 1st, we got caught off guard here in 2018. But I think by 2019, we'll have certainly some strategies for them to use in dealing with this admission standard.
Great. The second question regarded NCCP certification for coaches, and it was clarified that individuals who have current NCCP certification from one of the aquatic sports, swimming, diving, synchronized swimming, and water polo, would be accepted certified aquatic instructors, and as long as coaches may now hold an assistant lifeguard. Previously, it was a lifeguard. However, if the coach does not hold a lifeguard or assistant lifeguard certification, the pool operator shall ensure a lifeguard is on duty on the deck during the aquatic instruction practice or competition. So I think that's just a clarification there, and something that should be followed by all. Michael, was there another sport that that was asked about on the webinar that is not included here? There was swimming, diving, synchro, and water polo. I think they had was canoe and kayak acceptable. Was that not the question?
I don't recall the list. The focus was on the NCCP certification, because it wasn't listed before in the regulation. Of course, it's still not listed, and swim coaches in particular were the issue, and the need for some sort of recognition of an instructor certification for them that would attach itself to the assistant or lifeguard certification that they would also hold. So we focused in those areas as the traditional activities in public pools.
All right, and here's just some additional notes on this, as we've already highlighted, and the Life Saving Society has added all of this information into their new resources, as well as other organizations. All right, now we're going to dive into some of the more technical questions,
I think
and I'm going to.
Yeah, sorry, Diane, before we get there, and because we're still talking about instructional, I saw a question come up about scuba. The existing certifications of NAUI, PADI, and I can't remember the other one, remain in the regulation as recognized scuba instructor certifications, and those would remain valid from the old reg to the new reg.
Great, thank you. All right, chemical controllers. Are downloaded records of the chemical controller activities and readings accepted forms of record keeping if they are printed and inserted daily into a log book? So there was some rather heated discussions on this topic, and I'm going to hand it right over to Michael to go over what the discussion was on this.
I think the discussion focused on there is still a need, of course, to maintain records in public facilities. The regulation doesn't specify how that is done. And given that many of us operate facilities that are being run by controllers and computers that log this data, there was a hope that there would be a recognition of, because the data is being logged and recorded, that would satisfy the intent of the regulation. It's been our belief that if the data is there and it can be provided to the public health inspector, whether you run to the office and print off the log sheet for them, or you print them off daily and put them in the logbook, then that would satisfy the intent of the regulation. We manually test our facilities once a day anyway, but to provide those records and maintain those records are important, and as long as you can provide them for the inspector should they wish them on the day of their inspection, I think that satisfies the intent of the regulation.
Great. And we have a question there, but I'm just going to flip to the next slide before we get to Connie's question. Automated controllers do not provide data on alkalinity. Therefore, new regulations require testing every 2 hours of alkalinity instead of every 4 hours or daily. Michael, again, over to you on this one.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any controllers out there, and I believe we heard this on the phone call that there are no controllers out there that will record alkalinity on an ongoing basis, and because because of the regulation and the requirements of the regulation, this would then mean then, although you may not be looking at testing chlorine, pH, you would be required to test alkalinity on a more frequent basis than you might if you were testing chlorine and pH. So the alkalinity is an important factor in all of this, and because it's a regulated test that's required, it must be tested every 2 hours rather than simply recorded every 4.
Correct. So yes, Clara has asked that question. It is every 2 hours. That's where the her question is, the new health regs say alkalinity must be tested every 4 hours, not 2 hours, is the question. Just to clarify that for us.
Alkalinity tests, the regulation requires that if you have a control where you record the results of chlorine and pH and alkalinity, if it's testing or recording it every 4 hours. But where you don't have a device, then you have to go back to manual tests every 2 hours. And as I said, because alkalinity cannot be tested through a controller, that would require you to test alkalinity every 2 hours.
Right. Perfect. Thanks for that clarification. And while we're on the subject of alkalinity, Connie Smith has asked about hard water. Michael, if you can answer that question, that'd be great. If not, we will take it offline.
Yeah, areas of hard water, total alkalinity is an issue. It certainly is, and trying to maintain an alkalinity of 120 parts per million as a maximum is a tremendously difficult activity. I believe that within the regional health units, this is likely a topic for discussion with your regional health unit. There are areas of the province that are particularly hard hit, and I know Connie from the Cambridge area has particularly hard water, and so her alkalinity values, as she say here, are over 200 parts per million. So I think that discussion has to happen within your regional health unit to see if there is any provision within the unit to allow you to exceed this level, or at least devise some strategies to work to more manageable levels that are within the intent of the regulation.
Great. Again, we're going to the technical detail. Are PPM readings required for an automatic sensing device? And we've now left my area of expertise completely, so I hand back to Michael to give us an overview. And I think this is more of a point of clarification regarding PPM readings, but I'll let you again, Michael, explain the discussion that was that's captured here in this bullet.
Yeah, I think because the regulation, as you all know, allows you to record residual chlorine readings and ORP, or oxidizing reduction potential readings, through different systems. The regulation is, in my mind, pretty specific. It's asking for a chlorine or bromine residual and not an ORP reading to be taken. And so in my mind, the automatic sensing device is really looking for PPM or residual readings rather than ORP readings. And I think that, this is probably another area of discussion within the ministry, and clarification still required. But for the moment, it's my view that where we have automated systems, we need to ensure that they're measuring residuals of chlorine or bromine. And I suppose ORP could be seen as another device to measure, but likely not seen as important as the residuals that public health inspectors will be looking for.
Great, thank you. And I would just add to this discussion at that point, you've given me a good opportunity to bring up the fact that generally with large regulatory change like this, there is going to be another regulatory update. I'm going to suggest maybe in a year they may put out some refinements to this, and that's where we would be working with you and with all stakeholders to kind of say, okay, here are the real problems. And I think that's one of the things that we would look for. It certainly happened in the Child Care and Early Years Act when they brought in changes, then they had to do some clarification. So I think that that's certainly a possibility in the future. Compliance. So we've been talking about some of the issues that you've raised and what are the periods of compliance. It was a very simple discussion. It's case by case. It sounds like in many regions it has been a fairly smooth process, but in others we've heard that there's been a lack of communication from the health unit out to pools, and that inspections have not gone smoothly. We can expect these bumps along the road, but again, we're trying to monitor this, and certainly through Life Saving and Red Cross, hearing directly from you, our stakeholders, is important in this so that we are giving clear feedback to the ministry. Did you have anything you wanted to add there, Michael?
No, I would agree with you, Diane. I think that as they roll this out, they're getting all the questions and devising the answers. I would say that we've given these books, our guides to public pool regulations, out to over 600 public health inspectors across the province. So hopefully they're walking into your pools with these guides that will help them with some of the areas that we're discussing, some of the gray areas of regulation that we're discussing.
Great. And if I may be so bold, the second bullet on this slide says public health units are working with operators to provide education on regulatory requirements. I think we would say that it usually happens the other way, that stakeholders and operators are the informed ones that are often providing information back to the ministry. So we want to be sure that everybody has the best information. New regulations for recreational camps. Briefly, that was discussed on the webinar as well. The new lifeguard standards have been a challenge in the field and have not been implemented in 2018. There's been difficulty in interpreting what aquatic activities fall under the regulations and those that need to be supervised and those that are not. So that's certainly been something that we've heard from stakeholders. And here were the questions that came up on the webinar. If a recreational camp does not have a shallow area to conduct a swim test, how can they ensure compliance with the regulation? Swim test requirements should be set out in the camp safety plan. Again, there's, camp safety plans are, the regulation is a little bit silent on what that should contain, but we certainly know that Ontario Camps Association has great resources and opportunities to help you develop those plans. And then what are the supervision requirements for camp activities in the camp safety plan? Again, this was a discussion that was held, and it involves looking both at the Child Care and Early Years Act as well as the recreational camp regulation. Michael, did you have anything to add on that one?
No, I think what we're focusing on here is certainly the waterfront area, and I know the discussion, there's quite a bit of discussion about the wording of the regulation, and does that mean then canoes in the middle of the lake or out tripping or et cetera? My view is that this regulation is written for the camp and the waterfront area of the camp. The regulation, I don't believe, was ever intended to extend beyond that, and that day trips and so on and so forth. There may be a need to look at other standards that are out there, such as those from OCA and OFIA. But I think what we're looking at here in the application of this particular regulation is the waterfront area, the supervised waterfront area or designated waterfront area within the camp, and that the intent of this regulation is to deal with that area specifically, and of course the camp itself on land with the requirements for those areas as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point of clarification. There was some discussion about how one would, what supervision would be required in canoes or in any other kind of boating. And you mentioned the OFIA guidelines as well as Ontario Camps Association OCA accreditation as a standard for that. I know that certainly a focus of this have been the recent incidents that have happened, where recently criminal charges have been laid against a teacher for that kind of a waterfront accident and unfortunate death. So it's something that we're certainly wanting to ensure there's clear communication and that we can, make sure that our stakeholders have the best information possible again. So here come your questions that were submitted, and some of these came through the back door, and some of them came through our call out to each of you before the webinar. And certainly, if you have questions still unanswered, still things you want to cover, put them in the chat box, and we'll be able to get to them when we get to the end of this. So this came from a municipality asking, what if a public fountain has standing water that people enter? Is it considered a wading pool? And again, it was work with your local public health inspector to clarify. If it is deemed to be a wading pool, the health inspector should create timelines for compliance with the new regulation pertaining to wading pools. And we know that this could be something that might be an ice surface in the winter, and then it has standing water in the summer. Again, it has to have that standing water. There is no depth guideline for the standing water in terms of when it becomes subject to the regulation. That's correct, right, Michael?
There is a depth with regards to separating wading pools from public pools. That's something less
Correct.
than 0.75 meters.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, that's the only delineation. It's not if you have less than 25 centimeters of water, you are exempt. There's nothing like that. So anything with standing water then becomes subject to the regulation. So we have heard that public health inspectors have been working with the municipalities to help them create a safe environment and making sure that it's not too difficult or too onerous to comply. But stay tuned for more on that, and again, just working with your local inspector. The Provincial Offences Act was quite a hot topic. I encourage everyone to look at the 650 offenses listed on the official page. These are directly related to 565. They're quite detailed. So I know you guys are all incredibly conscientious, and we know as a sector we take this kind of thing very seriously. So while it seems overwhelming, most of it is common sense in terms of, yes, you are going to comply with this. It relates directly to the regulation, but it gives that framework for any fines to be assessed against infractions. Michael, do you have anything to share in terms of how this has had any resonance with your stakeholders?
Well, the fines are ranged between $55 and $465, and of course the $465 are things such as the clarity of water. It falls below the standard, versus the $55 would be less significant, much less significant issues such as the buoy line rope is not long enough. I think for most Class A operators, this is not likely an issue or one that they'll face because of the working relationships they have with their public health units. And for the most part, as you know, public health inspectors try to work with you to reconcile and correct deficiencies. And so it's there as certainly a stick if required, but I think for most of us, we won't be facing such fines. Hopefully not.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. working relationship is important. Right, but just for the link, just for your records, it was an interesting read. Here was a question that came in. The new regulation states until Section 8, every operator of a public pool or public spa shall keep and sign daily records that shall set out in relation to each other, to each operating day, and subsection D, the time of day the emergency stop button test, where applicable, was performed. How do we interpret this? Sorry, I'm having, should have read the questions before. How we interpret this is that the emergency stop button must be tested and recorded daily. However, the Life-Saving Guide to Public Pool Regulations still state that it is monthly. Can we get clarification on what is required? And so, Michael, can you just address that?
Yeah, I think the sentences below really answer the question. There's a section in the regulation that talks about frequency of tests, and we know from past history nothing has changed. We're still required to test this button once every 30 days in Section 16.1. I think what they're doing here in the provision of the log is allowing operators who may decide to operate or test more frequently to include this information. So as we know, the regulation only stipulates minimum standards. Many of you operate your pools above those standards by doing such things as testing these buttons more frequently. And so should you choose to do that, there will be allowance in your logs then to record those more frequent tests.
Great, thank you. Pool operator training. Someone asked, what does it mean when it says pool operators will now be required to receive training? And, oh, sorry, that didn't come up quite perfectly on the slide. The ministry is working on a list of recommended training and courses such as the Life-Saving Society Pool Operator Level 1, NSPF Certified Pool Operator, and the ORFRA Aquatic Facility Operator courses. There's a number of them are recommended minimum standards for training, and they are consulting with stakeholders to ensure that they have sort of a good list of what is current, what is a best practice. Location of spas. Can we get clarification on the new spa regulation when a spa is located inside of a changing room? All regulations still apply regardless of the location and use of the spa. Whether it's in the change room, whether it's beside the pool, in a different fenced area, it's all a spa is a spa is a spa. All right, sorry, Michael?
No, just stuck like that.
Okay, great. Okay, how does one ensure that every owner and every operator of a Class A pool shall ensure that there is a process in place to ensure a guardian or designated person supervises children under 10 years of age? It's just through an admission policy, swim test. We try to enforce that guardians will supervise kids, but we can't be 100% sure. And of course, that's always the case. The current admission standards recommended by Life-Saving Society and Red Cross should include posting signage, testing of bathers, and setting up that ID system so that you can minimize your risk. Michael, anything else to add to that?
No, and I think that for a number of years now, we have imposed this upon the public, the admission standard that, in fact, the Ministry of Health started promoting about 2 or 3 years ago. So for most of us, this is not new news, and we've all been posting our signage, educating the public, evaluating swimmers, ensuring direct supervision where required, and using some sort of ID system such as wristbanding. So for most of us, this is not new news. We've all been doing this, and although it is difficult, I'm hearing more and more these days that children are walking up to the clerk at the front desk and asking for their yellow wristband or red wristband. They already know what the admission standard is and are, certainly eager. Some are eager to get their wristbands and hop into the pool.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in a large facility where there are, a large number of younger bathers, that can be a challenge for the guards to monitor who's got an adult with them and who has the right number of adults with the right number of kids. But I think, putting in place every kind of risk management process you can is the best course. Julia has asked, what about children under 10 who pass the swim test? Children may be admitted unaccompanied in the pool, so how do we monitor whether the guardians are staying? I'll pass that to you, Michael.
Well, yeah, it's my view that any children that are under the age of 10 and who pass the swim test, there's no requirement for parent or guardian supervision. The standard that we created certainly a number of years ago allows certainly kids between the ages of 6 and 9 who pass the swim test to be unaccompanied. Where we do require constant supervision is children under the age of 6, where, yes, there must be direct supervision at all times, whether they can swim or not. And that's an important aspect to remember.
Great, thank you. This is one of the hot topics, I think, was the regulations recognize lifeguard and assistant lifeguard certificates issued by Life Saving Society, Canadian Red Cross, or another organization that provides equivalent training in lifeguarding and that is approved by the minister for the purpose. How will this process be managed and monitored? Well, I think the short answer, unless I've missed a memo, is that we don't know yet. And the process to grant equivalencies is still under development. And that Red Cross and Life Saving are consulting with the ministry on this. And I pass it over to Michael.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Diane. We don't know the answers to a lot of these questions about how this will be done. We do know that because of affiliate requests and demands that we maintain a single standard across this province. And so Red Cross and Life Saving Society have been working together to provide that standard to the ministry as a basis of their evaluation of those that do apply, but I do not know, and I don't think the ministry knows at this point in time what the process will be for application.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, and I could see potentially if this falls into regulation, would be one of those opportunities for sector feedback to the ministry. On the process, specifically the process and engagement. So I think we would be looking for that. We haven't heard of any timelines. Of course, we've had a government change. We've had also some staff at the ministry leave. Many of you might have seen Tony Amalfa at the Pro Aquatics Conference. He has retired and or will be retiring soon, I think. So we know that there's a change in certainly the political staff and perhaps a change in timelines for implementation. So we are redoubling our efforts to ensure that the ministry is informed of the issues, of the challenges, and of the opportunities that we have to strengthen aquatic safety through partnership, through working with them. So that brings us to the end of everything that was provided to us in advance and those issues that were discussed on the recent Ministry of Health webinar. And I see now people are starting to type in. So I will just, while people are typing, I'll just take this moment to remind everyone of the dates of the Pro Aquatics Conference, November 20th to 23rd. We'll be having lots of fantastic sessions. I've had an opportunity to read through the sessions. I think they're fantastic. Lots of great sessions presented by Life Saving Society, and we have lost our presentation for a minute. Oh, Jennifer's going to play something, I think. No, we're back. Lots of great sessions presented by Life Saving Society and by Red Cross, and I think there's some pre-conference stuff going on too, so look for your brochures, and registration to open very, very soon. All right. First question is always, will you get a copy of today's presentation? Absolutely, you will, and happy to provide that to all participants later today, I think, or this week anyways. Just a few more people typing. And Michael, did you have anything you want to share with stakeholders about work that Life Saving Society is doing relating to this or other new developments?
Well, we continue to work on our waterfront safety standards. We know many of you operate waterfronts in Ontario, and over the past few months have been working to finalize or revise those standards that are out there. So certainly in time for next summer, we'll have some standards available for you.
Great. And Sarah has asked if CALA instructors, where do they fall in terms of instructors if they are not NCCP? Where do they fall, Michael?
That's a good question. I don't know. Because we don't, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe this is our waterfront or water fit instructor base here in Ontario and throughout Canada. I don't know where they fit. I suspect because it is a recognized certification, we'll likely review that and provide some guidance for affiliates on that issue, and I can't see it not being recognized, but we'll take that under advisement and take a look at that.
Yeah, I think it would be similar to NCCP, that an assistant lifeguard would be a minimum requirement. In addition, would that be a safe assumption?
Well, CALA would be a recognized instructor certification. Of course, there would still be a requirement for an assistant lifeguard or lifeguard certification.
Correct.
In their back pocket as well. And I was just reading the second question, Diane, and this is reflecting on certainly this question I get about aqua fitness, and is it a class, and therefore does it fit under instructional, or is it recreational? The question really is being asked because of the ratios that are that are different. Where it is instructional, yes, you're limited to 25 bathers in the pool under the supervision of that AquaFit instructor, who is also an assistant lifeguard or lifeguard. But of course, if this is recreational, then you can put 30 people in the pool and provide supervision with the lifeguard. So, in the most of the cases, what I've said is that I see aqua fitness as an instructional situation, limiting then the bathers to 25 bathers or patrons in the pool, whether the person is certified with assistant lifeguard or lifeguard, or there's a lifeguard on the deck providing the safety supervision of them or not, or could they be guarding another program in the pool. It's important, I think, in instructional settings to understand that the regulation, in my sense, is written that the instructor and lifeguard are working together, if they're not one and the same, to provide safety supervision of those candidates and no one else. So if there are other activities going on in the pool, then it's likely you're going to have to station another lifeguard or assistant lifeguard, depending upon what you're doing, on the pool deck to provide safety supervision. And of course, if they're the only one on the deck, there would be two lifeguards being provided.
Great, thank you for that. Tom has asked, given Health Reg 17.21 and corresponding Life Saving Society notes, children aged 0 to 5 must now enter the pool with a ratio of 1 adult to 2 children, regardless if the child is wearing a life jacket. What are some strategies, tips in handling school electives, day camps, daycare, rentals to implement and educate within arm's reach with these large group rentals? That's almost a question for the group, but I know that certainly many daycares in the city of Toronto anyways do not take children 5 or under to public pools. They'll take them to a splash pad, but not with no standing water, but they won't take them to a pool, not until they are older. But if others have information that they wanted to share in the chat box, or Michael, if you want to add to that, anything that Lifesaving might have available?
Only to say that it is good that we have one admission standard here in Ontario, and that standard applies to everyone, whether you're at day camp or you're a birthday party or you're coming in with your own children to a public swim. It's important that when you have very young children under 6 years of age, particularly cannot swim, and certainly most who cannot touch the bottom of the swimming pool, that the ratios are maintained at a very low level. There's no provision in those ages for the use of life jackets because we know from discussions that these children need constant and direct supervision at all times. Otherwise, they may be taking their life jackets off and wandering into the pool. I believe you're right. We do need to consider some strategies that will help in this case, rather than simply banning young children from swimming in public pools. And certainly we'd be eager to discuss this and help this along.
One little strategy that I know people can use is someone has suggested using older children to help supervise. I leave that with the experts to discuss, but under the provisions of the Child Care and Early Years Act, children, if you're working with kids now, this is age 6 to 12, not the really young ones, children age 6 to 12, if you have someone under the age of, I'm going to say 19, so 18 years or younger, minimum wage actually, there's an exemption from minimum wage, so you can pay less than minimum wage to younger people working with young people. It's all around camps and ensuring that you can provide some income to youth working with children at camps. That's just a little aside. You can look up the exemption. It stayed, sorry, not under the Child Care and Early Years Act. It's under the Labor Relations Act and Employment Standards Act, recent changes to Bill 140 and Bill 148. Parent volunteers, yes, that's also a very good a good opportunity to engage the parents. And again, it's about the education out, working with your stakeholders. And in large municipalities, that can be a challenge, but in smaller communities, great opportunity to reach out to all those providers. So we have somebody else. Alex is typing something, and oh, it's Jennifer Green. Thank you, Jennifer. For ages 5 to 7, we offer swim lessons for camps and only offer leisure swims for ages 8 plus, meeting supervision requirements. So there's a good guideline to follow. So I don't see anybody typing. If we are done with our questions, if there are specific things that you are running up against, we want to know. We want to hear from you. We've heard of some inspections being done against old regulation instead of new regulation. So we want to just track those incidents, track any challenges, any great things that are happening, so that we can use that for advocacy. So on the very last slide, of course, we have our contact information. Gives you the 2 regulations, of course. I'm sure you're all familiar with those, but it also gives you the email. If you do have specific questions that you can't get answered by your health unit, you can send them into environmentalhealth@ontario.ca. I do not know what the response rate is to those. I certainly know with the Child Care and Early Years Act, it took some time to get those questions answered, so I think your best bet is still to go directly to your health unit. And again, please feel free to contact your Life-Saving Society or Red Cross representative that you work with, or Michael or Gail. And in general advocacy or issues that you're facing, I'm happy to take those. I certainly cannot answer your technical questions in any way, shape, or form, but I like to know what some of those issues are. So again, I just thank everyone. I especially thank Mike Shane for all of his work. He has done a tremendous amount with support of Life Saving Society and certainly Red Cross as well, have done so much to support stakeholders in this transition and to work with PRO. We really appreciate that. Michael.
Thank you, Diane, for hosting us.
You're welcome. I think we have one more scheduled prior to the aquatics conference that may be more specific to things that are going to be coming up during the aquatics conference. So look for an invitation to attend that. And again, thanks everyone. Enjoy your Tuesday afternoon. All right, bye-bye everybody. I'm signing off.